Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Matty here, and welcome back to Meta Monday, the weekly series where we analyze the Pokemon Pocket metagame and keep you guys up to date on everything that's going on in the competitive world of Pokemon TCG Pocket. So this weekend was the Ursa Days Pocket Weekly number 30. About 1,000 people competed in the second largest tournament series rendition, the second largest tournament of this new format, the ED Crisis format. It's been an interesting couple of weeks, I'm not gonna lie. Of course, this is kind of the mini set that expanded on the Celestial Guardians format since we've gotten rare candy. You guys have been around week after week, and I do really appreciate it. First of all, we're gonna go ahead and take a look at the final standings, and then we're gonna go ahead and take a look at all of the deck lists. And then from there, what we're gonna do is pivot to the metagame tab, where we take a look at all of the win rates, the meta shares, the day 2 conversion rates, all of the really important statistics and data that definitely tells the whole story and provides all of the context that we need for, of course, the meta discussions that we get into on the channel. So feel free to use the timestamps down in the description below, guys, but definitely kind of stay tuned, and I would recommend that you kind of watch the whole video. That way you don't miss out on any important information, or I guess sort of, concepts and ideas that we touch on in the video. You should watch it, of course, is what I'm saying. Anyway, let's get right into it. Don't forget to like and subscribe. All right, let's do it. Okay. These are the standings, by the way, guys, of the tournament. Here we go. Yeah, it's an interesting, like I said, this is the second week. Again, what we're going to do is compare and contrast from the results from last week's Meta Monday, from the first tournament of the format. Things are going to be looking quite a bit different, I believe, over the last couple of weeks, or last week or so. A lot has changed, so yeah, it should be definitely an interesting thing to compare and contrast to. Of course, this is the final standings. Charizard and Silvally does get first place. Prout here from France, shout out to him, went 12-2. Charizard, Silvally, we'll take a look at the list in just a little bit. Now, I did make a video, I'm not going to toot my own horn, I did make a video about Charizard and Silvally about a week ago, and yeah, I thought even at that time it was a really great choice. Charizard and Silvally does go together pretty well. Silvally's all over the place, the strongest leadoff Pokemon in the game. Charizard's very well positioned in the sense that Buzzwole seeing a ton of play. We can KO Buzzwole even with Leaf Cape, that 150 with Charizard for weakness, as well as, KOing basically all of the other things in the format. Solgaleo definitely still common. Charizard just really well positioned. It's inherently a bit inconsistent, but when you pair it with Silvally, theoretically, you have a deck that can kind of take down anything in the metagame, which is definitely interesting to note. We've seen Charizard in the past, however, it has struggled against Oricorio, which, did see a little bit of play and has seen a little bit of play. But yeah, Charizard, Silvally getting the W this week, getting first place. I know some people are definitely going to over-exaggerate the meaning of this, but realistically, Charizard, Silvally is a good deck, definitely a bit of a high-roll deck, but as we see here in second and third place, we're both Buzzwole decks. Ken here from Japan, playing Buzzwole and Pheromosa, got second place, 11-2-1, and then Nymph Noctis from Mexico went 11-2, and he was playing Buzzwole and Celesteela. We've covered this in previous videos. It's basically just Buzzwole. Everything about the deck is pretty much the same. Buzzwole's Pheromosa is going to be playing 2 copies of Pheromosa, maybe 1 Kartana, but typically just 2 Pheromosa, 2 Cyrus, whereas Buzzwole Celesteela is not typically playing 2 Pheromosa, normally playing, I think, 2 Kartana and 1 Pheromosa, so just a little bit of a different list. We'll take a look and compare and contrast between the two, but no surprise to me that both Buzzwole variants got second and third place. Unfortunately, did get beat out by the Charizard player. Of course, definitely a fairly good matchup for Charizard and Silvally in that matchup against Buzzwole. Fourth place here, we've got Mangonoria, I think is how you say it, from Italy, playing Silvally and Zeraora. So this was another deck that really cropped up over the last week or so. Zeraora is finding itself in a variety of different decks. I know a lot of people feel a bit strongly about Silvally. I think Silvally's really, really strong. It can feel a little bit, I guess there's a lack of diversity, maybe some people might say, but just because there's a lot of decks that are playing Silvally doesn't necessarily mean that all of the decks are the same. They actually all function a little bit differently, but yes, Silvally is seeing play in a lot of different decks. This Electro-type variant with Zeraora is quite good. We played it a bit on stream. It does incorporate an Oricorio, a couple Zeraora. It's really all about fast pace and consistently getting an attacker off on your first or second turn there with Zeraora and Silvally. Definitely a very, very strong deck, very consistent. There you go, fourth place. Now, Godboy here from Thailand, Giratina and Darkrai EX. So 5th place, didn't make it into top 4. Now, Giratina and Darkrai did win last week's tournament. It was kind of a surprise win. I believe Buzzwole in back-to-back weeks has gotten 2nd, 3rd place. So I still really high on Buzzwole. I think it's an incredible deck. I think it perhaps is the best deck of the format. I had it number 1 on my tier list last week. It did lose to Giratina and Darkrai in a very surprising turn of events in the finals this week. Giratina and Darkrai fell to 5th, but also 11th place here, D'Angelo from the United States, the highest United States representative here, 11th place. It's crazy crazy to see the diversity of the different countries of participation in the, I guess the grassroots tournament metagame here in Pokemon Pocket, as well as when you're playing in the ranked battles online. There's just a massive variety of people around the world playing Pokemon Pocket, and I think that's really cool. But anyway, shout out to Godboy there playing Giratina and Darkrai. Again, we'll take a look at the lists in a little bit. And then Froggy X Valdin as well as Cena here from France, respectively, and Japan, both 6th and 7th place, playing Solgaleo and Shiinotic. Definitely a top deck in the format. No surprise to me that we got a couple of them in top 8 here. Interesting that they both kind of whiffed from, top 4, but, again, very, very strong deck. And then here at 8th place, Gonks here from Spain was playing Sivali Rampardos. And then at 9th and 10th place, just bubbled right outside of top 8, we've got Denny Martinez from Spain playing Naganadel and Guzzlord. And then this player here, I can't say the name, I don't know, from Portugal, 10th place, playing Guzzlord, but without Nihilego. Still the poison variant, just no Nihilego in this list. These are actually the two different variants of Guzzlord that we've seen in the format right now. And if we go down a little bit, kind of much of the same. So shout out to all of these players here that, of course, did really well, just didn't really make it, obviously into top 10 or top 8 of the tournament. Shout out to Jody here, 23rd place. So shout out to Jody. He makes great videos. You should check him out. A couple of streamers in here. I don't know this player, but definitely check him out as well. So yeah, so Sivali Rampardos, there was one here in 8th place, but not too many realistically. Now, what we saw last week was that Sivali Rampardos was in fact actually the most played deck of the format, but had a really good day 2 conversion rate against sort of the greater field in day 1. But Sivali Rampardos, I think, has fallen off in play a little bit, especially considering how many other decks that kind of counter Sivali Rampardos have begun to see play. It didn't do very well in day 2, even though last week it had a good conversion rate. We'll take a look at the metagame statistics and everything at the end, towards the end of this video, which you guys can go ahead and check out once we get there. But yeah, Sivali Rampardos, not too many up here. There was a just Sivali deck. I don't know. Let me just quickly take a look here. Okay, so this is Electric type Sivali. It's just categorized improperly, I suppose. And then, so yeah, there was one in, 8th place right here with Gonks, and then we don't see it again here until 19th place. So I think a lot of people assume that Sivali Rampardos was kind of dominating the format, but as we've seen, really hasn't had nearly as much representation at the top of the standings over the last 2 weeks as really a lot of other decks, predominantly things like Buzzwole and things like, of course, Giratina, Darkrai, and Solgaleo. Those certainly seem to be decks that are doing quite well. Fire does get the W. It's kind of cool to see Charizard win. I know this is not Genetic Apex Charizard, but honestly, Charizard is still one of the best Pokemon in the entire game, and I think it has a bit of an upgrade now with Sivali. Definitely a good partner. But anyway, guys, yeah, that's the final standings. Shout out to all of these players here. We did see a Tapu, Koko, and Oricorio here at 25th place. A lot of Buzzwole down here, some more Solgaleo, a couple Fire decks. But anyway, those are the final standings of this week's tournament. Now let's dive into the deck lists. Here is going to be the first place deck here from Prout, from France, playing Sivali and Charizard. Now this is interesting to me because this is actually going to be 2 copies of Type Null and Sivali, as well as 2 copies of Charmander and Charizard. So a 2-2 lineup of both. A 2-2-2-2-2 lineup, I guess, is what you... I don't know what's going on, which is interesting. And the reason that's interesting is because I think a lot of people that were playing this list were only playing 1 Type Null and 1 Sivali, maybe playing some extra supporter cards. A lot of Pokemon in this deck, so you're not always able to do the full damage from Sivali. Only 1 Gladion, which is interesting for sure. 1 Mars, 1 Lily, 1 Sabrina, and 2 Professor's Research, because we are playing 2 Rare Candy and 1 Pokecom, as well as a total of 9 different Pokemon in the deck. There's a lot less space for supporter cards, which of course does make Sivali a little bit less consistent. But that being said, Gladion is a supporter card we can always play. Research as well, Mars, so you can certainly play around this deck in a very interesting way. Theoretically speaking, this deck doesn't have a lot of hard counters. We'll look into the metadata later on, but theoretically speaking, Charizard does kind of beat Buzzwole, it beats Celesteela, and it kind of does have a decent matchup against, the Giratina and Darkrai combo. And then Sivali is just a really consistent leadoff option that we're seeing dominating the format. So when you pair the two together, you have a Charizard deck that can cover the Oricorio matchups, and kind of Charizard in general does well against the other most common decks of the format. So in theory, this is a deck that has a very, very phenomenal matchup spread against all of the most common decks of the format. But one thing is for sure is that this deck is going to have some inherent inconsistencies. Theoretically speaking, we could just still turn to Charizard Stoke, which is really, really strong. Charizard is a Pokemon that doesn't mind going first as long as we can get that Stoke off, right? 1 energy in the attack cost. So there's still going to be those scenarios where, we turn 2 Rare Candy into Charizard and we just press the Stoke button and then we're kind of rolling. But there are going to be some scenarios where maybe we go through double Sivali and then force our opponent to KO with Charizard at the end of the game. That's definitely going to be a really, really strong combination. Again, Sivali here can counter some of those Oricorios that we're seeing, but Charizard in general, especially if it gets out early, is kind of a deck or a Pokemon that's just going to steamroll most decks of the format. Of course, still KOing Buzzwole for weakness. We can KO Solgaleo. It does 10 damage to itself, so unless it has a giant cape, Charizard is kind of rolling through Solgaleo as well. We also have one copy of Lily to effectively have 240 HP across 2 turns. Definitely an interesting deck list here, but yeah, 2 copies of Type Mill and Silvally is interesting because I think commonly what we've seen is people just playing 1 copy of the Type Mill Silvally. However, in my video that I did last week, I ran 2 copies because I figured why not, you know what I mean? I think my list was a little bit different, but very, very similar. So it's kind of cool to see a deck list that I covered over a week ago now end up getting first place at the Earth Days tournament. Of course, this isn't a deck that I created by any stretch of the imagination, but when I made that video, it was because I thought it was a really, really strong sort of counter meta pick towards a lot of the most common decks of the format. And of course, now it's seen enough play to where it's not necessarily a counter meta choice. It really is just sort of a meta deck, but really, really strong and really well positioned. Pretty cool to see it get first place. So shout out to this player here. I think Charizard's really good. Again, we'll look at the data in a little bit. That'll give us a little bit more context. Again, I do stress to people not to just take a look at the standings and then play the decks that, win the tournament. It doesn't, there's typically a deeper story involved. A lot of luck is involved for sure to winning a tournament, but we'll take a look at the data at the end here. Second place, Ken here. This is going to be Buzzwole and Pheromosa. So I think Buzzwole really is kind of split right down the middle in terms of how people are choosing to play it. This might be still the most common version of Buzzwole, which is, of course, not playing Kartana, playing 2 Pheromosa, 2 Cyrus. I think that in general, this deck list is inherently the strongest deck in terms of its ability to always have kind of a win condition. Guzma, I think, is kind of needed regarding how many tool cards are in the format now, but since we're not playing Kartana, just 2 Pheromosa, we have room to play 2 Research, 2 Ericas, 2 Cyrus, and then only 1 copy of Lusamine here with 1 Mars, 1 red card. So a little bit more hand disruption and then less Lusamine in this deck. I personally am a big fan of playing 2 Lusamine. I think it's too oftentimes a win condition, but listen, this was the second place list in the format. We have seen people play 1 copy of Lusamine time and time again, but I'm still pretty high on 2 Lusamine. I know it's not a card that you're always going to need 2 of, but it is a card that you're oftentimes going to need at least once, so if we don't draw into it, that's certainly going to be a downside. But this player here, kind of opting to be on the other side of the hand disruption metagame here, instead of playing 2 Lusamine, he's playing just a copy of Mars and red card. Both are going to be really good in the format for sure, right? So, not too surprising to me that this deck list did do well. Again, I don't necessarily know what I would cut here. The 1 Giant Cape is interesting. I don't know. This is an interesting one as well. I've had this thought for quite some time that, Leaf Cape is 10 extra HP than Giant Cape, but how often does that really matter? Of course, Charizard is KOing us regardless whether we have Leaf Cape or not. And then if we go to 160 HP with Giant Cape as opposed to 170, we're kind of out of range of getting KO'd by most things anyway. And we have 2 copies of Ericas no matter what. So the fact that we can play Giant Cape in the list means that we can attach that cape to Celesteela because it's not a grass-type Pokemon, which means we can go to 140 and potentially be out of range of getting KO'd by a variety of different Pokemon, probably most prominently being things like Solgaleo, so it's an interesting strategy. This might catch on. We'll have to see. I don't necessarily know off the top of my head all of the breakpoints and the relevant kind of KO numbers where Leaf Cape might be better than Giant Cape, but against the Charizard matchup, it certainly doesn't matter, and Giant Cape certainly is going to be better in a variety of different scenarios, predominantly, in my mind, off the top of my head, against things like a Solgaleo hitting for 120, right? Getting Celesteela out of range. So that's interesting for sure. Maybe Giant Cape catches on here. Hand Disruption is just really good. We see time and time again the decks that do well in tournaments are playing Hand Disruption. Of course, that Charizard deck didn't really have any space for it, but it doesn't really need Hand Disruption. So yeah, this Buzzwole list playing both 1 copy of Mars and 1 red card, to me, is really no surprise. I mean, it's a little bit of a surprise, but it's no surprise to me that it did so well in the tournament. Like I was saying, this is sort of one way that we can play Buzzwole, and what we'll do here is take a look at the 3rd place list, which in my mind is the other way that we're playing Buzzwole. Now, both of these decks did fall, I believe, in top 4 here. Hold on, my phone is ringing. It's a spam caller. We're going to cancel that. No editing. We're keeping that in the video. 3rd place was Celesteela and Buzzwole. Now, I think what we can do, potentially, I think Ken made the finals, right? So Celesteela made the finals, but I think, Pheromosa made the finals, right? Lost to Charizard, but I believe Buzzwole and Celesteela also lost to Charizard just the round before, and I think Buzzwole and Pheromosa ended up playing the Silvally deck. So a little bit lucky in terms of its matchups, but both of these players had effectively the same record. Ken just tied 1 more game. They both won 11, lost 2. But anyway, let's take a look at Noctis's list here, which is going to be the other side of the coin in terms of what we're seeing play in these Buzzwole decks, which is going to be a Kartana-focused variant. Now, even the Kartana decks are playing 1 Pheromosa, which is really just because Pheromosa is such a strong win condition. But because we're only playing one Pheromosa, we're only playing one copy of Cyrus. So we're playing one extra Pokemon in the list, which means we're cutting a supporter in here, likely cutting one of those Cyruses and one of those Ericas, still playing one Sabrina, one Cyrus, one Guzma, one Mars, 2 Research, and 2 Lusamine. So one Rocky Helmet as well. So Rocky Helmet is another thing that I covered, I think, last week on the channel. It's going to be really good in a variety of scenarios. The combination of Rocky Helmet and Guzma is going to help a lot in the mirror matchup, as well as having Kartana. So you could have a Kartana in the active spot with Rocky Helmet, and theoretically against the Charizard or against the Solgaleo, we can then do 40 damage, they hit us, that's 60, and then they're in range of getting KO'd by a Buzzwole, which we can then set up with Lusamine. So that is kind of the direct sort of line for this particular list. Giant Cape as well, so no Leaf Capes in this list, and I find that to be very, very interesting. Like I said, the 2 highest placing Buzzwole decks this list are playing Giant Cape, so it definitely adds a bit of flexibility in, I guess, our ability to win some of those matchups, probably against Solgaleo, but maybe some other stuff as well. Buzzwole does struggle in traditionally against Solgaleo, so that's a very, very interesting inclusion here. Just allowing Celesteela to live a hit could buy you an extra turn, could be the difference. So I actually really like this list. I know it's a little bit more all over the place, maybe a little bit more or less, I suppose, streamlined in terms of what the deck list is going to do than the Pheromosa version, but to be honest, at first glance, this is a list that I actually greatly prefer. I think it's rocking just a little bit of everything. 2 Lusamine to me does yell to me. I'm like, yes, 2 Lusamine. I love it. 1 Cyrus, 1 Sabrina, so we've got a little bit of best of both worlds. We even do have Mars and Guzma in here for a little bit of hand disruption. Of course, 2 Research, 2 Pokeballs still, 1 Leaf Cape, or not Leaf Cape, 1 Giant Cape, and 1 Rocky Helmet. I really love this list. In my mind, it's incorporating kind of a little bit of everything that you want in Buzzwole. And because the core package of Buzzwole really is just like 5 or 6 cards, you kind of can, just play 7 Pokemon in the deck, right? So it's not like you're kind of, sacrificing that much consistency. There are going to be some awkward times where we Pokeball and we grab a Pheromosa instead of the Kartana where we want it, or vice versa. But, it is what it is. At the end of the day, they're all basic Pokemon. The deck should inherently be pretty consistent. And because we're playing multiple copies of really most cards of the deck, and we have a lot of different options in here, I really like this list. I know it got 3rd place, and I know that the Pheromosa version got 2nd place. Again, it's probably just about luck of the draw in terms of your matchups and your pairings in day 2 and in the final cut bracket, but I really do think that Celesteela list, I'll pull it up again because this is just beautiful in my mind. I mean, if I'm picking to play a deck right now, this is it. This really is it. I know Charizard won the tournament, but Charizard has some inherent inconsistencies, and again, if we're looking to play something on the ranked ladder, this to me is screaming in my ear. Play me. This list is absolutely incredible. Yeah, honestly, probably one of my favorite 20 card lists that I've seen so far of this entire format. I just can't pick anything wrong with this deck. Maybe 1 copy of Ericas could make the mirror matchup a little bit sketchy, but we are playing Rocky Helmet Guzma. That should alleviate some of that pressure. We are still playing Mars, 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus. Sabrina's still going to be really good early on against some of those Charizard decks, but also Silvally, so I like the Sabrina. You could play Repel. I know some people have played Repel over Sabrina. I think that they're similar enough. That is definitely a point of contention. Should I be playing Sabrina? Should I be playing Repel? I think they're both good. I don't necessarily know if it really matters. There are some times, of course, where you can play Research in the early game, draw into Repel, so you're drawing cards, and then you still get the same Gust effect, but in general, Sabrina's probably going to be a little bit better in the mid to late game, so maybe it's more worth running. Interesting nonetheless, but I love that list probably more than anything. Absolutely phenomenal deck list there. Shout out to Noctis. Kind of the perfect list in my mind. Next up is going to be I don't know. I can't say this name at all. From Italy. Anyway, this is going to be the Electro type Silvally deck. So this, in my mind, is kind of the most, I would say, most played, but kind of the most successful version of like any kind of Oricorio deck. A little bit less common in this format than we saw last format. Sure, Magnezone Oricorio is still around. There are some copies of this deck or versions of this deck that are playing 1 Zeraora and 2 Oricorio. That is somewhat going to be pretty good against like Charizard decks, but most of the Charizard decks are playing Silvally, so I wouldn't say it really matters that much. Really, 2 Oricorio is only going to help you maybe against Giratina and Darkrai, or against Solgaleo. Those are really the only 2 matchups where maybe having a second Oricorio might be beneficial. But the reason why Zeraora is better than Silvally is, of course, the scenario where we can use Dawn to attack a turn earlier with Silvally if we're going second. But also, if we lead with Zeraora, this just kind of creates a more consistent leadoff option. It's a free energy attachment, so whether Zeraora is in the active spot and then it gets that free energy with Thunderclap Flash, we can basically use Zeraora as a free pivot, and we can just use our attachments to, of course, attach to type Null and Silvally. So it's just a more consistent leadoff option. If we lead or if we play double Oricorio, we have the opportunity to just lead off with Oricorio, which is definitely not something we want in a variety of different matchups, especially against the Silvally mirror match. So I do think Zeraora to Silvally is correct. This is all about a consistent, fast-paced Silvally deck that kind of utilizes Oricorio as kind of a win condition, maybe as sort of a Pokemon that can stall, or I guess sort of just win the game in the late game. Theoretically speaking, against Charizard, we are playing one PCL and a Giant Cape, so theoretically in the mirror matchup, if we kind of win the Silvally head-to-head, we can have Oricorio on the back end to kind of finish the game. So it does still kind of work. Like, the deck flows a little bit differently than other Oricorio decks, which were a little bit more in your face with Oricorio. This is a deck that definitely is centered around the Silvally package with Zeraora, but just utilizes Oricorio as an option to win the game late in the game if we've kind of eliminated all of their non-EX attacking options. Of course, against things like Giratina and Darkrai, it's still going to be its own win condition. Only 7 Pokemon in this deck, so again, tons of room for supporters. Does make Silvally very consistent in this deck. 2 Gladion, 1 Dawn, 1 Sabrina, 1 Cyrus, 1 Pokemon Center Lady, 2 Research, 1 Giovanni, 1 Mars. So basically a bit of everything as we're seeing across a lot of different decks in the format right now. Giovanni is going to be able to allow you to KO opposing Silvallis. Giant Cape allows you to be out of range of stuff like that. Also, Giant Cape on Silvally puts you at 130. That's out of range of a Solgaleo. So definitely a lot of relevancy in that Giant Cape and the Giovanni. I think those are important inclusions in this deck. Something that we've seen as well, I believe, in Rampardos and Silvally, even though we have a little bit less room for supporter cards in that deck. I think that the format right now is definitely a bit cracked open in terms of which decks are more viable. I think that Silvally Rampardos is quite good, but unfortunately, I think there's just too many decks that people are playing in the format that are strong against it, which is why we haven't really seen a ton of Silvally Rampardos, at least high up in the standings over the last 2 weeks. Not that that deck is underrated, it is just sort of the deck that sort of the counter meta has been formulated around. There's a lot of decks that are kind of at a disadvantage when that happens. This week it also declined in play, so no big surprise to me that Rampardos wasn't super high in the rankings, but anyway, let's take a look at Godboy's deck here. This is going to be the highest placing Giratina and Darkrai deck, which is, again, the if not the exact same deck, very similar to the deck that won Ursa Days last week. In my mind, it is probably still the best way to play Giratina Darkrai, which is going to be without Nihilego, without Kamala, or any kind of tech inclusion. Just straight up Giratina and Darkrai, 1 Rocky Helmet, 1 Giant Cape. Now, this is actually a bit interesting. I think we've seen 2 Rocky Helmet, 1 Giant Cape in the list that won last week. We're playing 1 Red, 1 Guzma, 1 Sabrina, 1 Mars, 1 Cyrus, 1 Leaf, 2 Pokemon Center Lady, 2 red card in a Mars. So, or no Mars in the deck, actually. Oh, no, there is. Sorry. Okay, my bad. 2 red card, 1 Mars. So this is basically Giratina and Darkrai with some extra healing with PCL, some extra damage modifiers here with Red and Guzma, which is kind of interesting, but just a lot of hand disruption. And that's really, I think, the upside when you play Giratina and Darkrai is that you're inherently a very, very consistent deck that, of course, is going to disrupt your opponent's consistency very, very often with all of the hand disruption that's in our deck. So that's really what it comes down to. And I've said this before, even though this deck won last week, I don't think Giratina and Darkrai is a great deck in the format right now, and I don't think it's that well positioned. There's too many Stage 2 sweeping Pokemon, too much Silvally early pressure in your face, there's some Oricorio, Buzzwole as well, being able to KO Darkrai in one hit is definitely really relevant, so I don't love Giratina and Darkrai's positioning in the format, but because it's such a consistent deck, and because we can fit in so many important and impactful, trainer cards in the deck, like all of the hand disruption and the healing and the gust and the damage modification, it just has basically everything going for it. Even though theoretically its positioning in the format isn't nearly as good as it has been, I think that this is still a very, very consistent deck. In my mind, potentially the most consistent deck in Pokemon Pocket right now. You probably are going to lose against Oricorio, so that's the reality of it. But as we've seen, a lot of those Oricorio decks are only playing 1 copy, so theoretically we still do have some potential to win that matchup. But yeah, we have the potential to win any matchup because we're just a bit more consistent than other decks, and of course we have so much hand disruption. That's really kind of where Giratina and Darkrai fits into the format right now. I think that the Poison variant is going to be a lot better against an Oricorio deck, but I don't think Oricorio is that common in the format. That's my opinion. So yeah, here it is, Giratina and Darkrai. I think a lot of people have really settled on how we should be playing it right now. Not something that I'm super high on, even though it has done pretty well in recent weeks. We'll take a look at the win rates and the metadata later. But anyway, there is Giratina and Darkrai. Now we have 2 Solgaleo and Shiinotic players. I guess we can compare the 2 real quick. Here's going to be Frog EX Valden's deck here. And I think most Solgaleo decks are pretty similar. I think Solgaleo is still quite good. I think that the rise of Charizard in the format does kind of make Solgaleo a little bit less good, and the rise of Oricorio makes Solgaleo a little less good. That's probably where these decks got weeded out a little bit. But against all of the other decks at the top of the format, whether it's Giratina and Darkrai, whether it's Buzzwole, whether it's Silvally Rampardos, Solgaleo actually has quite a good matchup. This is a deck that just kind of plays Solitaire, and when I say that, I'm not making fun of this deck. What I mean is that really, it doesn't matter what your matchup is most of the time. Basically, no matter what's going on in the game, you're doing the same things every time. And that's not a bad thing. Inherently, it actually makes the deck a little bit easier to play, theoretically making it a better choice, especially for players that maybe, are struggling to find a deck that they like. Now, this is a deck that's either going to win based off of the cards it draws, or it's going to lose based off of the cards that it draws. Not a lot of hard counters to Silvally in the game. Of course, we are going to struggle against Charizard. We are going to do well against Buzzwole, but that's kind of where Solgaleo really fits into the metagame. I still think it's a top option here. This is very standard in terms of the deck that we're playing here. One copy of red. I believe about 60%, 65% of the people playing Solgaleo are playing one copy of red, and I do think it's correct. One Mars, one Cyrus, one Sabrina, one Lily. Now, one thing I will say is that because we're playing Shiinotic and we're able to basically thin all of these Pokemon out of our deck, at least somewhat early on, sometimes it leaves only these trainer cards in our deck, right, effectively, which does make this deck very consistent inherently in the late game. You're always going to have some of those trainer cards available to you. So as long as we're able to get our Pokemon online, this is a deck that is very, very dangerous and can potentially always kind of win unless you hit a couple of those really bad matchups. The reason Oricorio is bad is because we don't have any other attacking options other than Shiinotic, which only does 40 damage with 90 HP. So Oricorio is going to kind of beat you. Just inherently. Silvally can 1-KO a Shiinotic, and then we just have Oricorio and you can't lose, right? So that's the downside. Some people do play Magearna. On stream last night, we did run into a Solgaleo deck playing Magearna, and we did lose, which is pretty funny. I don't necessarily think Magearna is that good in the list, but it is something you can play if Oricorio is something you're a bit afraid of. Anyway, that is the highest placing Solgaleo deck. Let's just compare and contrast it to this other one, which I believe is basically the exact same, but instead of red, we're playing Guzma. So there you go. That's kind of two sides of the Solgaleo coin. Not a lot of variance, or I guess variety, in the way that we are choosing to play Solgaleo in the format right now, but either Guzma or red. If we really think about it, I think that red is probably a bit better in the format. It allows you to KO something like a Buzzwole if they don't have a Giant Cape attached. You could even play one red, one Guzma, but in general, I think red is probably a bit better, just because there's probably more scenarios where playing, of course, red is going to get you the KO than Guzma is. It's kind of up in the air. I don't necessarily know how many are different. I guess Guzma would be better against Rocky Helmet. Decks that are playing Rocky Helmet, of course, red might be better against decks that aren't. I don't really know. I think they're both probably pretty good. Yeah, that's really the two differences there. You're either playing red or Guzma, but the rest of the deck is kind of the same. I don't really know what else you would run here. You could theoretically cut one of the hand disruption cards here for maybe a second Lily, or maybe, like I said, Guzma and red. So that is a possibility, but both of these players here choosing to play the copy of Mars, hand disruption is still pretty relevant in the game right now. Solgaleo is a deck that does kind of carry into the late game pretty often, so I would say the copy of Mars is probably correct. Next up, let's take a look at Gonks' deck. I think we're saying that name correctly. From Spain. This is going to be the highest placing Silvally and Rampardos deck here at 8th place. And yeah, so this is pretty similar, I think, as far as things have gone here. The red, we're actually seeing a little bit more commonly with Rampardos and Silvally than Giovanni. Of course, red isn't going to allow you to KO your opponent's Silvally with your Silvally, but what it does do is it theoretically allows you to take a KO on a lot of Pokemon with Rampardos. Rampardos' damage here, 130, is an incredible attack, but there are a lot of Pokemon that are going to live an attack, right, for 130. So red, allows you to KO things like a Buzzwole, like a Giratina, like a Darkrai, etc., etc. Red, I think, is a little bit better when you're playing Rampardos than Giovanni is. However, if you're playing against Silvally decks all of the time, then maybe, you just play Giovanni. But in general, I think red is probably the more common option here. We have Mars, we have Sabrina, we have Gladion. No Cyrus in the deck is a little bit interesting. One Giant Cape as well. We're seeing Giant Cape in basically all Silvally decks, which kind of makes Buzzwole have to play Guzma. And we kind of see that all of the Buzzwole decks do play Guzma. But yeah, either way, yeah, here's Silvally Rampardos. I don't even have anything to say about it. Pretty standard from even the beginning of what people were playing. I think, again, Giant Cape might be a bit new, red might be a bit new, but overall, the deck is kind of the same as it always has been since people started playing it. Still a really strong deck. I just think that the format, again, kind of shifted around it because this is sort of the gatekeeper of the format. So that's kind of what we're seeing. Still definitely a top deck of the format. I don't know if it's like top 2 or top 3, but certainly a really strong deck. And no surprise that it, got at least 8th place. I'm a bit surprised that that's the only one we see here for a while, but yeah, it is what it is. So shout out to Solgaleo Rampardos. Let's finish off the deck list, I guess, viewings here by taking a look at some of the Guzzlord decks, because, and what I will say is that the standings for this tournament did kind of pan out in a way that I think is very appropriate according to kind of how I kind of categorize the metagame right now, right? If we look here, just outside of top 8, we've got some of the more fringe decks. We've got the Guzzlord in here. We've got some Solgaleo decks. We've got Rampardos, right? But once you get in top 8, it really is kind of the decks that I believe are at the top of the metagame, right? Solgaleo Rampardos at 8th. 7th and 6th, we've got Solgaleo. We have a Giratina Darkrai thrown in there. We've got Oricorio thrown in there. 2nd and 3rd place are both Buzzwole decks, but at the top is Charizard, which again does sort of inherently counter the best deck in the format right now being Buzzwole. So the way that the top 8 specifically all kind of panned out, to me really does accurately represent what we're kind of looking at from a format right now, which is definitely kind of funny to see. It's just one of the more accurate, I think, standings in terms of the deck lists and their representations, which I think is kind of cool. But anyway, let's take a look at Guzzlord, because Guzzlord certainly is a deck that hasn't seen as much play as some of the other top decks of the format, but from a win rate perspective and from a results perspective, definitely garners some respect. I believe we put Guzzlord in the A tier last week, and it might still be a pretty solid A tier choice. We'll have to see again how things pan out in the upcoming weeks, but I still really like Guzzlord. Unfortunately, we are getting hit for weakness on Buzzwole. Oricorio is still in the format. The poison from Naganadel is relevant. However, Solgaleo is kind of up here to take KOs on everything that's not Guzzlord, which does make things just a little bit awkward. But this is going to be the version of Guzzlord, and again, there are 2 ways that we're playing Guzzlord. That's going to be either with Naganadel or not with Naganadel. I think Naganadel is a strong Pokemon, but inherently it's going to be weak in a variety of different scenarios. So, it kind of depends. It really does depend. Both decks have their ups and downs. We haven't, I don't think, seen enough play or enough proof in terms of the data to know which one is better. One might have a little bit of a higher win rate than the others, but in terms of placements, they've been pretty, steadily hand in hand. We got the 2 Nihilego, 2 Poison Barb, Guzzlord. So a ton of poison in the deck. That's really what this deck is all about. 2 Lucamine to string together a Guzzlord or to get the second Guzzlord set up. Really, really strong. 1 copy of Mars, 1 Cyrus in here. You could play some other stuff, but in general, I think these are kind of the bread and butter cards in the deck. A lot of Pokemon, 10 Pokemon, and of course, we're going to be playing Poison Barb, Pokeball, and Research, which really only leads 4 cards in the deck. Because we're playing Ultra Beasts, you got to play 2 copies of Lucamine. So yeah, we really only have like 2 spots in the deck, and that's going to be Mars and Cyrus. So that's kind of the downside to playing Naganadel. It is a stage 1 Pokemon, so it's inherently a little bit inconsistent, and of course, it does take up 4 spots in our deck. So that's kind of the downside, but Naganadel is certainly a strong card. So yeah, here it is. I don't really have too much else to say about it. We can take a look at the metadata for Guzzlord later, but let's take a look at the other version. This is going to be this player, Ison, his list, which is going to be the other side of the Guzzlord coin. Like I've said, we've seen kind of a perfect representation of all of the decks of the format here in the standings, which is kind of cool. We're able to see basically the entire extent of the format, which in my mind is very balanced right now. Some people have kind of addressed their concerns with how much they don't like this metagame. We'll talk about that here at the end of the video. I think that the meta is actually incredible right now, and I think that it's very well balanced, very well spread out. But anyway, this is the other way that we're playing Guzzlord, no Naganadel, right? So we've got 2 Guzzlord, Nihilego, and Celesteela, just 4 slots open because we're not playing Nihilego. That does mean that we're a little bit more reliant on Poison Barb, so we do get beat by Guzma. Definitely a little bit more often. However, in this deck, we can attack with Celesteela, but predominantly the whole point of this deck is to have Guzzlord in the active, get your grind cores off, chip down, and then use Lucamine to go into your second Guzzlord, and then just start kind of KOing with for 120, and hopefully winning the matchup that way. Because we're not playing Naganadel, we do have some room for some other cards in the deck, that being 1 Pokemon Center Lady, 1 red card, 1 Sabrina, and then 1 Team Rocket Grunt. Those are all really decent inclusions that do a lot for the deck in a variety of scenarios. A little bit of extra hand disruption here, even some energy disruption, even some further energy disruption with Grunt on top of Grindcore. But yeah, anyway, I think Guzzlord is really good. I just don't know if it's really caught on enough and has seen enough play for us to really justify putting it at like a super high tier. But I do think it's a deck that deserves a lot of respect, and to my mind, seeing it right behind in the standings all of the more common decks like Rampardos, like Solgaleo, Darkrai, Oricorio Solgaleo, Buzzwole, Charizard Solgaleo, it's really funny to me to see its placement there, because on a tier list, that's kind of where I place Guzzlord, which is just kind of funny to me. The standings for this week might actually pretty accurately reflect our tier list. We'll have to see. I do think it's kind of funny that it kind of panned out that way. Let's scroll down a little bit, see if there's something that we could maybe pull from that we haven't taken a look at yet. Right here at 22nd place, Sanutora from Canada is the highest placing Incineroar Charizard deck. So I do think Incineroar Charizard is still a strong deck, right? It's more of a high roll deck. You're not necessarily splitting your differences like you are when you're playing Silvally. That's sort of the upside to when you're playing Silvally, is that you are just a Silvally deck. So you can always just win by playing Silvally. This deck list, you don't really have that advantage. Of course, Oricorio is going to be a little bit more of a struggle because we don't necessarily have a ton of counterplay to it. But like I said, not a lot of decks are playing 2 copies of Oricorio. The thing with these Stage 2 decks is that a big reason why a lot of people are pairing them with other Pokemon like Silvally, or they're pairing them with like Shiinotic, like Solgaleo is because they inherently either make the deck more consistent or give it another path to victory. When you're playing a deck like this, you are just very reliant on drawing your rare candy combos and getting them out fairly early. I was never a big fan of playing 2 copies of all of this, but what's interesting about this deck is that we're playing 2 copies of Litten, 2 Incineroar, 2 Charmander, and 2 Charizard. So there's been a lot of decks that were playing like 2 Charmander, 2 Charizard, and then just 1 copy of Litten Incineroar. I never really liked that because if we do get Litten out early, then there's no guarantee, right? It's less likely that we're going to draw into the Incineroar, which inherently does make the deck a little bit less consistent. But I actually do like this, playing 2 copies of really all of the basics in the Stage 2 Pokemon. That way, kind of no matter what we draw into, it's a little bit more likely at least that we can get that rare candy combo out. 2 copies of Lily, 2 Research, 1 Repel, so a little bit of a Repel sighting here, which is kind of funny. No Hand Disruption for sure, not that much space in the deck. It's inherently a strong deck. I just think it's a little bit too inconsistent, especially in a format right now where you're going to be facing down these turn 2 Silvallis very, very commonly. But anyway, shout out to this player playing Incineroar and Charizard. Where was the other? Right here at 25th place, Alana here from Indonesia was playing Tapu Koko or Oricorio. So let's take a look at this. Tapu Koko was something that was pretty popular, I think, in like the first couple of days. I think it was kind of hyped up, right? We were like, oh, like we have a new, Pikachu EX sort of upgrade card, right? We've got Tapu Koko, inherently a bit of an underwhelming card, but we did have Electrical Cord, which allowed us to then go into a second Tapu Koko or our Oricorio a lot easier. So there was some upside there for sure. Zeraora, also an interesting new card. To be honest with you, I just think that Tapu Koko is a worse Pokemon than Silvally. And that's really just what it comes down to. Silvally does more damage. It barely has less HP. In fact, it has the same amount of HP with Giant Cape. So, inherently, I would rather just go type Null, do 40, and then go into Silvally and do 140 damage total. It's just kind of better. It just ended up being better than Tapu Koko. So that's kind of what we're seeing here. Tapu Koko just has been kind of taken over as a replacement for Silvally, which is a little bit disappointing because Tapu Koko and Electrical Core definitely seems like the combination of which we were supposed to be playing with Zeraora and Oricorio. That's kind of what I think the developers intended, but Silvally just ended up being a little bit too strong. I do like Tapu Koko. I just think it's underwhelming. Like 130 HP is low. No matter how you slice it, it's not enough HP. And of course, Silvally is just a better Pokemon. Electrical Cord is a nice card, and it does, of course, work for your Electric-type Pokemon, but it's really not needed. It really is not. We're not even playing Dawn in the deck, so it's interesting to see Zeraora. I think it's just sort of here as an attacking option, like as a backup, so I think that that's also fine. Also a free pivot, like I said, with Thunderclap Flash. Yeah, so here's Tapu Koko. Like I said, it was a bit more popular early on in the format, but really has seen a pretty dramatic decrease in play. No surprise, honestly, that, it hasn't been doing too well. But anyway, yeah, I think that's probably it. Is there anything that we're missing here? If we go down, okay. So there's some interesting stuff down here a little bit farther here, like Cosmo, YTB here, playing Giratina Stoutland. This is an interesting one. So I actually quite like this deck. So Stoutland, of course, Guard Dog Visage. It does increase the energies that your opponent needs to use their attack. Having some synergy with Tapu Lele, we have seen Stoutland with, of course, Gallade in the last week or so as kind of the fringe meta deck. This might be sort of the new fringe meta deck that's on the tier list. This is going to be the Tapu Lele Giratina core, and we are playing Psychic Energies in this deck, which does allow us to theoretically be able to attack on turn 3 with Giratina. We still have the Tapu Lele strategies. I just think that Tapu Lele in general, much less good in the format right now because Silvally, right? So that's the thing. Silvally is a big gatekeeper. It kind of gatekeeps a lot of the leadoff Pokemon that have been in the game previously. Silvally literally just does 100 damage on its second turn, right? So it's just kind of a lot to deal with. Tapu Lele will be getting absolutely bodied by a Silvally, which is tough for sure. But yeah, Stoutland, 2 energy and its attack cost. We kind of wish, I think for sure, that was, of course, 1 energy. Like if this was a 1 energy attack for 50, I think it would just be a bit better than like 2 energy 70. But 140 HP is pretty good. The effect, like I said, is good. It can install your opponent for a turn. This is going to be kind of our leadoff, or Tapu Lele and this Pokemon will be our leadoff. But yeah, I think that Stoutland is a bit of a meme card. Certainly not a bad card by any stretch of the imagination. Again, does have synergies with Tapu Lele, which increases damage based on how many energies are on the Pokemon that you're attacking. It can do damage to the bench as well, so we're playing one copy of Cyrus with it. Giratina as sort of our leadoff attacker, or not our leadoff, but our kind of finale closing attacker, right? Yeah, it's a pretty fun deck. So Tapu Lele and Giratina, at least it's sort of found somewhat of a home in this current format. I just think that Tapu Lele in general has gotten a lot worse because of Silvally, which is probably why we don't see it that often. But shout out to Stoutland here, 43rd place. I think that's pretty cool. We did have a Magnezone and Oricorio here as well, which is still Magnezone Oricorio. Honestly, not a bad deck as well. But again, Silvally just kind of makes decks like this a little bit tough. Magnezone is probably not coming out until turn 3, maybe turn 4. By then, you're getting absolutely smacked by a couple Silvallis, and you're going to have to deal with it. Silvally with Giant Cape is living in attack for Magnezone. So I think that's another big reason why maybe Magnezone or Oricorio hasn't seen as much play. But anyway, guys, there's a Charizard Turtonator as well. Not something I would really recommend, but certainly, you have some upside if you draw your cards, right? I mean, come on, like a turn 1 Kiawe Turtonator is hard to deal with. It really is. And we're playing Charizard, so you could always win that way. This is not a bad deck, but I think that Silvally is a bit better, honestly. I don't really foresee Turtonator really taking over. And again, it is going to struggle against Silvally, right? Because Silvally, the type null attack into Silvally is doing 120 at a minimum, right? So it's like, we're only hitting for 90. So not only do we have to draw Kiawe, but if we don't, we're just getting KO'd on turn 2 if we're going first. And that, of course, feels quite bad. So yeah, another Pokemon, Turtonator, that unfortunately has been kind of gatekept by Silvally because it's such a good Pokemon. Oh, Silvally. That, I guess, is the one gripe with this format. Silvally is just maybe a little bit too good. But it's okay. I think it's flexible being a colorless Pokemon, so we've seen it in a lot of different decks that it is at least an upside for sure. But anyway, yeah, Charizard and Silvally. If I missed any decks here in the standings, I apologize. We might come back to it and take a look at some decks that, of course, maybe didn't place as high, but were more kind of rogue or off-meta, anti-meta decks. We'll maybe come back and take a look at those decks for sure. But anyway, guys, let's finish off the video by taking a look at the metagame data. If you've made it this far in the video, I appreciate you, but this is really where we get into the full context. So let's go ahead and take a look at the metagame tab. And this will give us a little bit of a greater understanding as to what really went on throughout this tournament because, the standings don't give us the whole story is really what I'm getting at here. So actually this week, by far, the most played deck at 13.5% meta share was Buzzwole and Pheromosa. However, kind of struggled here. 47 or 48% win rate, which is quite low. 322 to 338 with 12 ties. So certainly not a great record for Buzzwole and Pheromosa. Like I said, I think there's too many decks at the top of the format, especially with Solgaleo being the second most played deck this week. Does, in my mind, not kind of bode very well, especially with the increase of fire decks as we see here. A lot of Charizard Silvally, a lot of Blacephalon Silvally that, of course, do well against Buzzwole here. Still seeing quite a bit of play. Those fire decks did, which is interesting. So yeah, Pheromosa, Buzzwole kind of struggled a little bit from an average win rate perspective, even though it did get second place in the tournament. Solgaleo and Shiinotic here, second place, or second most played deck at 12% of the meta with a 52% win rate. So 349 to 317. So to be fair, I think it just comes down to the fact that Buzzwole was the most played deck. Definitely propped up Solgaleo a little bit from an average win rate perspective. Rampardos Silvally, the third most played deck, drastically decreasing not only in play from this week down to 11.5% of the meta share, but only a 45% win rate. So again, what that tells me is against a lot of the decks that are seeing play in the format, it really isn't a deck that's doing quite well. A lot of people are catching on and playing decks that just have good matchups into Silvally Rampardos. It may be falling out of a top tier slot in tomorrow's tier list. We'll have to see. Definitely not a strong deck into the field. Now, one thing is interesting. Now, this is where the sample sizes get a little bit smaller. Buzzwole and Celesteela at almost 9% of the meta share with a 53% win rate, 253 to 213. Definitely a great showing out of all of the decks really in kind of the top most played decks. This was by far the most successful deck. So like I said, this was technically the third place list and Pheromosa was second place, but I'm telling you what, that third place Buzzwole list was just, it was so good. I hit my mic. It was so good. It's such a good list. I mean, one of my favorite lists I've ever seen. Honestly, kind of a perfect deck. But, one thing to just take note of, and we did put Buzzwole at the top spot of our tier list last week, even though I think we did segment the decks. was that, Buzzwole here at with Pheromosa, 13% of the meta share, but if you add Buzzwole Celesteela, that is almost 22% of the meta, which is by far the most played deck, right? So, I mean, yes, if you added up all of the Solgaleo decks, maybe that overtakes it, but Buzzwole, whether you combine both categories or not, was by far kind of the most played deck of this format, which is definitely interesting. The difference between Pheromosa and non-Pheromosa in terms of win rate is a bit staggering, I'm not going to lie. But anyway, there you go. Giratina Darkrai still about 7% of the meta, 51% win rate, so it's sticking around, guys. It's something you're going to have to deal with. I mean, it's not really going anywhere. This might have been the third most played deck last week, dropped down to 7% meta, but still decent performance here. Charizard Silvally actually struggled, only 46% win rate here with 5% of the meta share. It did win the tournament. So again, this is sort of the full story that I like to tell you guys. Inherently, Charizard Silvally is an inconsistent archetype. Maybe that number one played deck, or maybe the first place deck list was like the ideal kind of 20 card list for Charizard Silvally. Maybe not everybody was playing that particular list. As we see here, most people were playing 2 Type Null and 2 Silvally. So I think most people were playing kind of the same list, but inherently speaking, Charizard Silvally, a bit of an inaccurate deck, or I guess inconsistent deck. So yeah, even though it did win the tournament here, very, very low win rate. So basically amongst all of the most played decks, all the way up here, it was the lowest average win rate, but it got first place. So again, you got to look at the whole story. Some people might be trying to play that number one ranked Charizard list on the ranked ladder, might be like, oh man, I'm struggling. Yeah, it's inherently not a consistent deck. If you're playing 10,000 games, you're probably not going to win as many of those games in like against a large variety of decks that you're going up against. But, if you find your way into day 2 and, Buzzwole's the most common deck, yeah, you're probably going to do pretty well. That's what it chalks down to. Charizard Silvally, definitely a counter meta pick. It won this week because it was a really strong counter meta choice, but inherently did struggle across the entire field here. Same with Silvally Blacephalon, although in fact actually a little bit more consistent, 84 and 82, so effectively a 50% win rate. Silvally Oricorio, also about a 50% win rate. Guzzlord as well, 2% of the meta share. All of these decks didn't see a ton of play, but we're all about 50% of 50% win rate. And then as we see here, Silvally and Zeraora. So that's kind of the difference, right? Of playing 2 Oricorio or playing 2 Zeraora is the difference of about a 6% win rate, which is kind of crazy, 87 and 65. So again, I think that this deck does, kind of do a little bit better by leaning into the Zeraora Silvally combo and the inherent consistency that it brings and the pace that it brings to the deck. Greninja Oricorio still seeing some play here at 2% meta share. Again, 50% win rate. And then now we get into some more of like the fringe meta decks that maybe aren't doing so well. Gallade Stoutland, it is a bit of a meme deck here, 43% win rate. Charizard Incineroar, definitely struggled here, small sample size, 34% win rate. Guzzlord Naganadel, saw actually quite a bit less play than Guzzlord without Naganadel, but both ended up about a 50% win rate. Dark Arceus fell off in play, even though it is going to probably still be a decent deck. Probably disrespected. I think people just don't really want to play it. Still a strong deck, 35 and 30. Charizard Tornado also struggled. Magnezone Oricorio, about a 50% win rate. Silvally with Duskmane Necrozma. This was something I saw crop up here in recent days. Also struggled. And then, yeah, we've got all of these decks here that, what I would call sort of not really in the metagame. Look how many decks people played. That's the funny thing. The win rates are definitely skewed, right? Like, all of these decks are decks you're not going to see if you're in Master Ball tier. But these are decks that, I guess aren't necessarily terrible. Sometimes people bring them to the tournament. But really what we see on the page right here, I think, is the meta, right? Like, all of this is kind of meta in my mind. And I think all of these decks are quite good, honestly. I think you have kind of, your pick as to what deck you want to play. I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe more. 10 to 12 decks, I think right now we're actually, kind of really, really solid choices in the current metagame, which I think does bring a lot of balance. Now, half of those decks are playing Silvally, I will admit, but definitely a lot of variety in terms of the specific decks that you can play. So let's quickly take a look here at the day 2 conversion rates. That's something interesting to note. Basically tells us which decks did better, day 1 than other decks. So let's go ahead and take a look here at the meta for playing to win for day 2. As we see, Buzzwole Pheromosa here, still the most played deck, so did increase a little bit, went from 13% to 15% in terms of its meta share in day 2. Still the most played deck. Buzzwole and Celesteela, so the second most represented deck in day 2. went from an 8% meta share to a 14% meta share, so that's a really, really good day 2 conversion rate. Solgaleo Shiinotic was 12% of day 2 and was about 12% of day 1, so pretty even day 2 conversion rate there. And then as we see Giratina Darkrai, 10% of day 2, but was only 7% of day 1, so definitely a decent conversion rate there. Everything else here, decent little variety. Actually, quite a bit of decks that made it into day 2. A lot of different sort of electric Oricorio decks that ended up kind of finding their way. None of them did that well. In fact, if we take a look, and again, this is where the data really kind of crunches in, right? I would say that if you're translating the tournament data to like ranked battles, the day 1 kind of data is what you want to look at. But when you're looking at the results of the tournament and why certain decks ended up winning or doing well, that's when we take a look at the day 2 meta, right? So basically what you take a look at the standings is really just a result of this right here. These are the decks that were in the field. So because literally 30% of day 2 was Buzzwole decks, we see that Charizard Silvally went 8-2, had a very, very good run, a very, very strong win rate in day 2, big reason probably why it ended up winning the tournament. So again, that's sort of the whole story, right? Charizard Silvally just was sort of the counter meta pick to the most common deck in day 2, which was, I believe, probably the most predominant reason why it won. Also good matchups against Solgaleo as well. So effectively, what is this, like, you know, 40, almost 50% of day 2 were these 3 decks, which of course Charizard and Silvally has strong matchups into. No surprise to me that Charizard Silvally ended up winning the tournament. So again, a deck winning the tournament doesn't tell you the whole story. It tells you just that, is that it had good matchups against the most common decks that it faced or would face in day 2. Not something that necessarily translates directly to the ranked metagame. So like I said, if we're taking a look at what decks you should be playing in like the rank ladder, that's where I would take a look here at the combined standings of the overall tournament and see which decks sort of had the best win rate. Buzzwole Celesteela, really good choice. Solgaleo, I think, still a decent choice. Of course, Giratina Darkrai, still a decent choice. You know, Guzzlord decks or Oricorio decks, so Volley, these are all decent choices, I think, if you're playing in ranked battles. Yeah, there it is, guys. There's Meta Monday. Yeah, man, this was a long one, actually. 51 minutes is crazy. That's like one of the longest Meta Mondays in quite some time. I do kind of apologize. It's been a long one, but very interesting stuff here, and I love doing this, guys. It's one of my favorite things. I love Meta Monday. The tier list tomorrow will also be probably quite long, but a lot of content for you guys. We should be uploading every day this week. Last week, we, of course, missed a couple of days on uploading, but we'll get back into it, I promise. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned. Tier list coming tomorrow, guys. Tons of content. Yeah, there it is. I never know how to end the video, so we're just gonna sign off. We're gonna wrap it up here, guys. Peace out. Have a good one. Comment down below what you guys think of all of this. I would love to hear your guys' opinions. And yeah. Okay. All right. See ya. Bye.